George Galloway, and the mother of all talk shows. Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway.
Hell no, our kids won't go. Very soon in Britain, it may be legally impossible for a young person to buy cigarettes, but compulsory for them to go to war. Joe Biden's wars in Ukraine, in Gaza perchance, against Iran perhaps. Well, we know which is the more dangerous lifestyle and pastime. And as we cross the threshold of 5 Hiroshima bombs dropped on a concentration camp called Gaza, 75,000 tons of high explosives in the last hour, a family of 11 have been entirely wiped out in the Gaza Strip in a military attack on terrorists, except virtually every one of the 11 members in the family were children, as well as their mother, of course. And they're off and running, well, stumbling. Roland Rat versus Daddy Pig. That's right, Rishi versus Keir. It's all coming up here on the mother of all talk shows. Stay tuned.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway, the mother of all talk shows. With George Galloway, the world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
The world's highest court, the ICJ, of which Israel is a member, a participating member, a signatory to all the protocols, has been ordered by Netanyahu to stop their anti-Semitism. The ICJ demanded that Israel halt their assault on the tent city of Rafah, where 1.3 million people are sheltering from the storm of missiles, rockets, bombs, artillery shells, shells from warships, everything that America can give and that Israel can throw. Just in the last hour, a whole family of 11, mother, father, and 9 children have been wiped out in Gaza. All in the name of self-defense, of course. All in the name of Israel having a right to defend itself. And the Wall Street Journal produces a leader which argues that it is legally possible to kill children. That is, legally to kill children, according to the Wall Street Journal. These ghouls, these monsters who preside over us and provide the chorus to justify the criminal insanity of our rulers, to win consent for the prevailing orthodoxy, the prevailing narrative, have got to be stopped. They have got to be overthrown. Our governments are leading us to disaster. And Gaza is only one of the theaters in which they are doing it. Ukraine looks now virtually certain to collapse over the next few weeks. What's the Western answer? Not to cut their losses, your losses, of trillions of your taxes, but to reinforce failure and to send our young men into the maw in the conflict between NATO and the Russian Federation. Problem is, the young people are not prepared to go. Even the Ukrainian young people are not prepared to go. Not even 1/3 of those recently mobilized by the Chief Martial Law Administrator, Volodymyr Zelensky, whose presidential term is now null and void. He made a new mobilization order. 32% of those mobilized have turned up. So the Ukrainian young and old men are not prepared to fight for NATO. Easily solved though, isn't it? Let's get NATO to fight for them. Let's send our soldiers into the blizzard. For that is exactly what it would be. The French are already there. Of course, they claim it's a foreign legion. They're not really French, although they're wearing the French insignia and receiving their salaries from the presidency of France. But they're there even though NATO has repeatedly said that it has no intention of joining the war. Germany has refused to supply even more deadly missiles with which to kill Russian civilians because they would have to send their own personnel to help operate them. Why then are there so many German soldiers called mercenaries already there fighting in the Ukraine, fighting and dying? Ditto Poland, the largest single component of the multinational intervention in what is a civil war in Ukraine. Who knew that NATO's role was to intervene in civil wars on the border of the Russian Federation, a nuclear-armed superpower with multiple hypersonic capability and a dead man switch? If Russia is attacked with nuclear weapons, every single nuclear weapon in Russia, that's 6,800 of them, will simultaneously be launched at pre-programmed targets near you. Every target in the United States, every city, every town will be completely incinerated. You will be ash. Even if the entire Russian leadership is taken out by a first strike of nuclear weapons from NATO against Russia. Ditto every town and city in France, in Germany, in Britain, in Italy, in Poland. They will all be turned to ash. The world will turn into a nuclear winter, even if all the Russian leaders and generals are dead. It's automatic. It's a computer dead man switch. Have you thought about this? And then, of course, there's Britain. We don't have enough soldiers to send. We don't have enough soldiers properly to guard His Majesty. Buckingham Palace doesn't have enough troops to guard its perimeter. The British Army is so small it could fit into not the National or even any of the very biggest football stadia in Britain, but into middle-sized, mid-table football stadia in Britain. That's the British Army, Navy and Air Force. Our aircraft carriers are stuck together by glue. They crash into each other with regularity. They have to be withdrawn from the patrols on which the donkeys at Westminster have sent them. So how are we going to handle our wish to join the charge of the Light Brigade? Well, we now know the Prime Minister of Britain has just announced that if re-elected, national service, conscription of our young people aged 18 will become compulsory. What they're going to do about the fact that literally millions of our young people will refuse to go and die for little Rishi Sunak and senile, drooling, imbecilic Joe Biden. What they're going to do to make it compulsory is not clear. James, not very cleverly, the Home Secretary of Britain, was on television this morning. He said he ruled out refuseniks going to prison. So what are they going to do about the mass refusal that there will be? I know because I'll be organizing the mass refusal. Write this down, Mr. Not So Cleverly. We will mobilize millions of people in Britain. We will not go into your national service. No conscription. No to war. No to NATO. No young British person will die in Joe Biden or Donald Trump's American wars. Do you hear me? Hear me clearly. We will mobilize millions of people. I'll lead it as long as God gives me breath. Whether you want to designate that as a crime or not, if necessary, I'll do it from behind bars. We will not allow our young people either to be returned to the early 1980s, YOPS boys and girls, YTS boys and girls, which is the camouflage fig leaf for the military conscription that this truly is. They say, well, you might not have to go to war, you might be put to good work instead, by which they mean actual work that people should be being paid to do. You'll do for free for the crime of being 18, young and British. We refuse it. We've been there. Some of us are old enough to have opposed first time around the idea that our young people, denied a job, denied education that they can afford, will instead be sent out to pick up the trash. Compulsory, sent out to pick up the trash. We won't have it. We won't stand for it. I'll agitate here on the mother of all talk shows against it, and as the leader of the Workers' Party of Britain, I say no. Our workers demand dignity, demand decent wages, demand employment protection. We will not allow jobs to be diluted. We will not allow jobs to be spoiled by free labor, compulsory labor. We call that slavery, you see. And as our purpose, our only purpose, is to defend the rights of the workers, their health, their livelihood, their rights. How could you expect anything else of us? So expect us, Mr. Sunak. Now, of course, according to the latest opinion polls, Mr. Sunak is unlikely to be the Prime Minister. But just like everything else that the Conservative governments of the last 14, nearly 15 years, the so-called opposition will in one form or another soon adopt the government's policy. We agree with the government is the most often uttered phrase of the man that's paid to oppose the government as the leader of the opposition. And what has now happened is that it has been normalized that our young people may be conscripted and sent to war against America's enemies. And it's against that good night into which we will not go quietly. The truth is, in any case, the outcome of the British general election is very far from settled. It is argued by the prevailing orthodoxy, the deep state, the mass media, that Sir Keir Starmer, or Sir Kid Starver, as we call him, can already measure the curtains in Downing Street. He's a cert, a shoe-in. Well, I don't think so. And I don't think so for reasons which the media and the pollsters know, but are refusing to tell the public. And it's this, that nobody in Britain, beyond those paid to do so, has any enthusiasm for a Prime Minister Rishi Sunak or a Prime Minister Keir Starmer. Nobody moves out of love for either of these. And though the prime ministerial robes may hang loose upon Rishi Sunak's soldiers like a dwarfish thief, they won't fit Daddy Pig Starmer anymore neatly. They might even be too tight for him. But that doesn't mean that he's fit to wear them. His principal problem is that he is an inveterate, brazen, wicked liar who has lied and lied and lied and lied again when inside Corbyn's shadow cabinet, when running to be Corbyn's successor, when successfully being elected as the leader of the Labour Party, lie after lie after lie, so that the Labour Party is now an empty shell, a group of empty raincoats, suits, men at CNA, and they almost always are young men of a certain type who are swarming around the new Labour camp as if they owned the place already. And they do, of course, wholly own the Labour Party. This election in Britain is Blair versus Blair. Rishi Sunak is a diminutive, miniature Tony Blair. Sir Keir Starmer is a fat Tony Blair, without the laughs, without the polish, without any of the pizzazz. This is Blair versus Blair in every conceivable way. Brutal party management that roots out and expels anyone who just might one day say or do something that is in any way redolent of the ghosts of Labour's past. By which I don't mean James Maxton, still less John McLean. I mean Gordon Brown. I mean James Callaghan, Barbara Castle. 2 days ago I was in Blackburn. Barbara Castle Way. The Labour Party today wouldn't even know who Barbara Castle was, let alone acknowledge that they were travelling in Barbara Castle's way. I'm talking about Harold Wilson. I'm talking about Judith Hart. I'm talking about mainstream social democratic people. They are as alien from what passes for Labour today as a man in the moon, a man from Mars. This is not Labour. It should not be confused with Labour. Its hands are dripping in blood. If you care anything at all about those children that were murdered in Gaza today, how can you vote for a party which has supported from the first bomb the so-called right of Israel to self-defense by murdering children and women in their shanty, in their hovels, even in their tents? The shadow foreign secretary, the Idi Amin of British politics, David Lammy, bought and paid for by pro-Israel lobbyists, said on television that Israel has the legal right to bomb refugee camps. Keir Starmer, Daddy Pig, the leader, said on television that Israel has the right to cut off water, electricity, medicine, seal all entries and exits. Israel has the right, he said, to do that? What kind of person would you be if you were to vote for that? Everyone's sick of the two-party system, the two cheeks of the same arse. Everyone's sick of the uni party, and people come up with all kinds of schemes and ideas in order to change it. But it will not be changed if people keep voting for those two parties. It will not be changed if you reward the uni party with another 5 years of office. Have pity on me. I might have to sit and see up close and personal the crimes which are to come. It's going to be a great show tonight, so fasten your seatbelts. It's the mother of all talk shows. On YouTube, Keith Mitchell says, your success in Rochdale has made many, many more than just those who voted for you. As Roger Waters' mum says, do the right thing, George. Keep right with those in Rochdale and they will stand by you at the general election. I want to thank the great Roger Waters for his fulsome support in the contest. I want to thank Lowkey, our own considerable genius, for coming to Rochdale and performing so brilliantly, so dazzlingly in the constituency. I want you all to write this down. I was listening today to Lowkey's track, Long Live Palestine. And I always knew that it was musically extremely beautiful and inspiring. You know, the one with the chorus, Free, Free Palestine. But today, for some reason, in a car, I played it and I listened very carefully to the lyrics, which proved to me again that Lowkey isn't just a recording artist, isn't just an indefatigable activist. He is a professorial political genius. So write it down, Long Live Palestine. Watch it on Spotify at the end of this show by Lowkey, Lowkey.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Here's the poll for tonight. My goodness, 35,310 people have already voted, and I'm only now announcing it. Will Israel defy the ICJ ruling on Rafah? Answer yes or no. You can answer on my Telegram. It's t.me/George Galloway, on my Twitter, my X, on the YouTube community poll, or on the YouTube stream. If you're watching us on YouTube, please share with all your friends and followers. Ditto on Facebook, ditto on Twitter, any platform that allows you to do so. Please inform all your contacts right now that the mother of all talk shows is off and running. If you want to call the show, it is toll-free in the United States and Canada. Here's the number, +1 844 944 3344. It's free of charge in the UK and Ireland, 0808 196 5522. And in the rest of the world, it's 44203 966 2625. And welcome if you're listening to the show on KPFK 90.7 FM across Los Angeles and Southern California. Lowkey is the renowned hip-hop artist formerly referred to and is the host of the Watchdog podcast, as well as being a professorial and powerful political campaigner. He joins me now. Lowkey, thanks for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. You appeal very greatly to young people. I've seen them queuing in their hundreds outside theatres to come and hear you, see you, How do you think the idea of conscription at the age of 18 is going to feel to them?
Thank you for having me, George. It's wonderful to be with you. Well, the simple fact is this: the British political elite and military system is attempting to try and integrate young people into their war games in aid of US imperialism around the world. It has failed to inculcate these young people with the talking points of the military elite. It has failed to sell and manufacture consent for the wars around the world. And actually, year by year, the British Army is losing about 15,000 troops because people no longer want to join this military system. They do not view the wars as just, and they do not view themselves as protecting the people that need it and vulnerable people around the world. So therefore, this latest attempt to integrate people into that structure, I believe, will ultimately fail.
I'll organise, I'm sure that you'll be with me as one of the co-founders of No to NATO, No to War, a mass campaign of civil disobedience against this plan, if it comes to pass, you think would be successful?
Absolutely. When speaking to people on a daily basis, all of them looked at the idea of conscription. You know, at the moment, we essentially have a form of financial conscription where our taxes go towards a Ministry of Defense that was involved in the fourth British occupation of Afghanistan in 2 centuries. It was involved in the great calamity, the great crime against humanity, which was the occupation of Iraq. And actually, the British have been involved in at least 7 covert wars over the last decade or so, from Libya to Syria to Yemen, even to Pakistan. They've had involvement. And this is something that ultimately the great majority of the population, I believe, would not support if they knew the full details of it. So I think any movement of civil disobedience would likely cause great damage to the efforts of the government.
Now, the British general election is off and running, well, stumbling, crawling. I don't know how you'd put it. You're more lyrical than I. What's your impression so far of the Donkey Derby?
Well, you know, I have to remember the words of my favorite Pankhurst, Sylvia Pankhurst, the anti-war and suffragettes hero who, in the midst of World War I, stood against the push by her own family members towards that horrific mass killing of over 20 million people. She had great foresight to see that it was wrong and was willing to go to jail for her convictions about that. But she once said to Vladimir Lenin, as the story goes, "If we are real revolutionaries and join the Labour Party, these gentlemen will expel us." Now, that is something that has happened. Those who have looked at the Labour Party as a vehicle for societal change over this last decade, and especially during the Corbyn era, found themselves expelled without a word of comfort. And now we also have to remember that a big factor in this election is going to be servility towards the Israel lobby and support for genocide in Gaza. But of course, that's not actually new when we look at the history of Labour. Ramsay MacDonald, of course, visited Palestine in 1922 on Ben-Gurion's instructions. And he actually had Ben-Gurion, the future Israeli leader, as his tour guide. They had a great friendship. MacDonald later wrote a letter to Chaim Weizmann pushing a very clear Zionist line in the 1930s. We also have to remember, when it comes to this disobedience to the received position of the political elite of the day when it comes to wars, that the founder of the Labour Party, the unfortunate namesake of Mr. Starmer, actually passed away without being mentioned in Parliament simply because he opposed World War I. The mainstream media at the time smeared him as Kerr von Hardy and accused him of being an agent of the German Kaiser. Now, the Labour Party has followed suit again and again, smearing their own leader at a different point with Jeremy Corbyn as an agent of a foreign power. We also have to remember that the shadow, the ghoulish shadow of Tony Blair looms over this election, as you so aptly described it. Now, Blair was a peace envoy to Palestine at the same time as being a patron of the largest Israeli settlement building body in Palestine, the JNF. David Cameron, our current foreign minister, was also a patron of the JNF. You also have to remember that Tony Blair's wife, Sherry Blair, was also an ethical advisor to the Israeli intelligence firm, the NSO Group, that's behind the Pegasus spyware. How can we forget that around 400 phones in this country are believed to have been hacked by the Pegasus spyware, including in the office of Boris Johnson while he was Prime Minister? This sounds like a state that has no respect for its own sovereignty, George. But we also, when thinking about Blair, have to remember that Israel lobbyists were key to his election as Prime Minister through his close relationship with someone I'm sure you'll remember, Mr. Michael Levy. Now, simultaneous to fundraising for Tony Blair, Michael Levy worked as a fundraiser for Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak, who his son, Daniel Levy, was working for as a justice minister at the time. Now, Blair was first introduced to Levy by the Israeli embassy officer, Gideon Meir. Now, this was at the time when Blair was Shadow Home Secretary. Levy then set about raising for funds for Blair from key Israel lobbyists like Trevor Chin, who today funds Keir Starmer and David Lammy, Emmanuel Kay, who was the head of the Labour Friends of Israel, and even Westfield chairman Frank Lowy, who fought in the Haganah during the Nakba and participated in the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. Now, that led to Blair getting elected to stand for Prime Minister and then eventually winning. Now, when in government, Blair strong-armed Michael Levy into a position of influence at the Foreign Office as an unofficial envoy to the Middle East. Levy was accused by Lebanese politicians at the time of advocating the Israeli government position rather than the British government position. But, you know, none of it stops there, George. You even have currently sitting in the unelected House of Lords, where he shapes legislation, John Hutton. Now, Hutton, as you will definitely know and remember, was the Secretary of Defense under Tony Blair. Well, he later went on to work for Lockheed Martin, US arms company, who benefited massively off the war in Iraq. But he now serves as a director of a Rafael subsidiary in Newcastle. Now, Rafael is an Israeli state-owned arms company. So you have somebody in the House of Lords, John Hutton, who currently works for an Israeli state-owned company. I mean, if that is not an attack on sovereignty, I really don't know what is. And you look at the trajectory of Mr. Keir Starmer. This is somebody who, when he was Director of Public Prosecutions, he only met with one foreign state prosecutor. That prosecutor was Moshe Lador, the Israeli state prosecutor. And then 2 months later, Starmer blocked the prosecution of Tzipi Livni, the Israeli minister, when she visited this country. And now, in the leadership of the Labour Party, not only has Keir Starmer been funded by Israel lobbyist Trevor Chin, Starmer has even hired a former Israeli spy from Military Intelligence Unit 8200, Asaf Kaplan, to perform the function of social listening in the party. He's also accepted a £5 million donation from Gary Lubner, another key Israel lobbyist. I mean, look at the Speaker of the House, Lindsay Hoyle. This was someone that collaborated with Starmer on the plan of sabotage of the ceasefire vote on Gaza. This is somebody so close to Israel that he traveled with Tzipi Hotivli there to wax lyrical about his support for Israel in the midst of genocide in Gaza. And he's even previously boasted about his father, MP Doug Hoyle, being one of the founding members of the Israeli embassy proxy, the Labour Friends of Israel. It just doesn't stop there, George. The bottom line is this. If you want to fight back against the Israel lobby in this country, then you will vote for the Workers' Party, you will vote for George Galloway, you will vote for Chris Williamson, and you will push back against Labour wherever you find them.
Yeah, thanks. We're standing hundreds of candidates, as you know, including Chris and myself. And I'm certain that we're going to do very well. I'll give weekly updates on the campaign and would look forward to hearing from you again on that. In the time we have left, though, I want to ask you about the ICJ ruling. It didn't get much coverage here because, frankly, the British have opted out of the ICJ. Not formally, of course. We're founder members of it. We are still members of it. And yet we are openly defying the implications of its rulings. Its first one on the South Africa case, dealing with the plausibility of the charge of genocide, and now this second one, just days ago, demanding an end to the Israeli attack on Rafah. But they are still attacking, still murdering children and women and men in Rafah. And neither of the two British political parties of the so-called mainstream are saying or doing anything about it. So how would you be voting on our poll? Will Israel defy the ICJ ruling on Rafah? And what do you think the world governments, Western governments, will do about that?
Absolutely nothing at all, George. And I will, of course, be voting that the Israeli campaign in Rafah will not be stopped by the ICJ or the ICC. You know, you have to remember that it took the ICC a matter of days to issue arrest warrants for Putin over the operation in Ukraine. Of course, those are completely different situations. The entire world, over 30 countries at least, have armed Ukraine. With the Palestinians, there is only one state power that across the last 30 years has materially supported the Palestinian right to armed resistance, which the entire world, including UN Resolution 3246, recognize. But in the case we are in today, it has taken them this long. And, you know, Karim Khan has demonstrated that he is not fully trustworthy. He's tried to forge, and I mean that in both senses of the word, some form of equivalence between Palestinian resistance and between Israeli genocide. Now, in the case of the ICJ, I think they will definitely ignore it, and it will be a further piece of dirt on the grave of the established order of international law following World War II. And of course, Britain and the United States will support Israel in that horrendous endeavor.
Although not France and even Germany, there does seem to be a breach, albeit a small one, maybe a meaningless one in the end, we'll see. But Macron was the first to say that if Netanyahu came to France, he'd have to be arrested. If Karim Khan, KC, gets his arrest warrant, which hasn't happened yet. Then Germany, to my surprise, said the same thing. Then Ireland, Spain, Norway, all issued these proclamations that they recognized the state of Palestine. Do you see a division opening up in the NATO Western camp, is what I'm asking?
Well, you will also remember in intimate detail, I'm sure, the stands taken by Jacques Chirac over the Iraq war. Obviously, after the war went ahead, unfortunately, the French went along with the campaign, but France has always been seen as a less trustworthy alternative to the British, really, in Europe. So France, you know, we can have some form of hope, especially when we look at French engagement with China too. They seem certainly less hell-bent on the neocon arch towards escalation with China. So I definitely think there are cracks in the monolith, George, and I guess it's our job to make those cracks wider and wider.
Lowkey, you're a superstar, and it's wonderful to have you on the Mother of All Talk shows. Come back soon. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, George.
Will Israel defy the ICJ ruling on Rafah? Answer yes or no on my Telegram, t.me/George Galloway, on my Twitter, my X, on the YouTube community stream, a poll rather, or on the YouTube stream itself. 36,332 of you have now voted. It's pretty overwhelming, but let's make it even very much bigger. Quick break, and then it's your phone calls all the way to the hour. Now, you're used to telephoning questions into me on my various shows. I've spoken with thousands of you over the last couple of decades. But now, on my new show, you get a chance to appear in person on a video wall. It would be good to see what you looked like as well as what you sounded like. It's very simple to get on my show. Go to www.haveitoutwithgalloway.com. Just register there. We'll get you on the television with me. Come and have a go if you think you're hard enough.
You are listening to the Mother of All Talk shows with George Galloway.
Will you do that? Will you email us and join me on the video wall as a guest on my show, Have It Out with Galloway? I get plenty of people who hate me on the screen, which makes for entertaining television, I hope. But it would be nice to see one or two who didn't hate me quite as intensely as those who've been getting through. So that's how to do it. www.haveitoutwithgalloway.com. It would be really great to see you. The show goes out on Tuesdays at 7 o'clock on my platforms. Let's go to Amanda in London on Ukraine. Go ahead, Amanda.
Oh, hello. Good afternoon. Good evening, Mr. Galloway. Firstly, I'd like to thank you for everything that you and your very courageous wife do. We really have a great debt of gratitude to you. What I wanted to raise was something I just saw on a Telegram channel, and I have checked it to see that it was correct because I couldn't believe it. There was a photograph of Boris Johnson flanked by three Asimov neo-Nazis in the Houses of Parliament. Apparently on the 23rd of May, there was a Conservative Friends of Ukraine reception, and there is Mr. Johnson holding this giant flag. Now, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, to have neo-Nazis in the Houses of Parliament is a complete disgrace. And we're just coming up to the 80th anniversary of the D-Day landings. Many of my family died fighting Nazis, and as of course many, many other families lost relatives. And I just wondered what you thought about the absolutely appalling fact that those people were in the Houses of Parliament.
Well, a very important point and beautifully expressed. I thank you for it. That in the run-up to D-Day, there were Nazis in the Houses of Parliament is bad enough, but that they unfurled a fascistic banner, flag, and that was held aloft by a former Prime Minister of Britain who's up to his neck in all the blood that has flowed in Ukraine since at least month 2 of the war, by wrecking the possibility of the negotiated peace that had been initialed in Turkey in peace talks that would have saved the lives, therefore, of hundreds of thousands who have subsequently died. This beast, he used to be a joke, but now he's a truly wicked beast, Boris Johnson, and he's looking more and more beast-like. I saw his picture today out shopping, and he looks like he is bestial, and that he did that in the Houses of Parliament. from whence the D-Day landings were commanded, from where Churchill spat defiance at fascism and Nazism and routed the appeasers, that should happen in the British Parliament. This is a desecration of anything called British democracy. And if re-elected back to Parliament, I promise you I intend to pursue it, particularly if, as reported, the beast comes back in the guise of a Tory MP once again. Thank you, Amanda, for that call. A big thank you to Damien, who's donated £400 to the mother of all talk shows. Thank you, Damien, and thank you for your amazing email, which we've just received at onair@moats.tv. That's extremely kind of you, and it's from Geneva. We're very, very grateful to you. You can donate to the show from anywhere in the world, and I hope that you will do so. onair@moats.tv. There's a legend on the line in Glasgow. Sarkar, on Ukraine again. Go ahead, Sarkar. What would you like to say?
Thank you so much, George. Thank you for taking my call, and thank you, George, for being the voice of truth, for being a politician of integrity. While other people in the parliament are looking for their interests, you're speaking up for the truth. Therein lies the difference between you and the others. So, George, a very serious question. I'm relating this not just with Ukraine, but also how the West are propping up that evil guy called Zelensky. A week before, Antony Blinken from America, he literally visited Ukraine, and he was playing a guitar in a nightclub as if people believe that he was only there to play the guitar, as if he wants to be the new Jimi Hendrix. No, it's not like that. What he did was that he has propped up a legitimate dictator now. Why do I say a legitimate dictator? That guy, Zelensky, he sacked his chief of army staff who told him that the war is going nowhere. He sacked him a few months ago so that the war could be prolonged. And he sacked him in such a way that he did not just sack him, but also brought in martial law, which means that there can be no election, which is long overdue in Ukraine. So what that means is that with the blessing of the West, with the blessing of our taxpayer money, your taxpayer money, the average working guy's taxpayer's money, that guy is being kept in power. Why? So that the war can be prolonged and he can remain in power. George, we often blame North Korea and every other country in the world where there's no elections as if we are the high moral ground. But that guy is being kept in power. He imposed a martial law so there can be no election. What kind of a joke is this, George? And how long have you got to carry the burden of that idiot? I don't know, George.
Well, very powerfully expressed. I couldn't do so better myself, Sarkar. I won't try to. We are paying for all of this. Which part of that do people not understand? Every crumbling, damp, cold house in Britain could have been improved with the money that we gave instead to Zelensky to prolong a war which was a losing war from the start. Every waiting list, every overcrowded A&E department, every children's school where equipment is vitally needed and missing, every hungry school child having to go without a proper hot food, every child improperly clad, every social service, youth service, everything that we lack so badly in our countries, every piece of crumbling infrastructure could have been repaired, renewed, but for the money, the billions that we sent. And added all together, more than $1 trillion has been given to a tin pot transvestite president, then chief martial law administrator of a country that is fast disappearing. Which part of that farce do our people not yet understand? Thank you, Sarkar, in Glasgow. Now, our podcast, that's essentially the show stripped of some of the bells and whistles, promos, and so on. The essence of the show is in the podcast. You can get it wherever you normally get your podcasts from. But so well are we doing, we are now for the second week running in the top 10 in Russia. You try finding English speakers in Russia, and yet we are in the top 10 in Russia, in the top 5 in Nigeria, in the top 10 in Algeria, ditto. Try finding English speakers in Algeria. We're in the top 10 there, and we're number 1 in the Gambia. You can download the MOATS podcast by scanning the QR code on your screen right now. Let's stay in Glasgow, where Paul wants to talk about the British Army. Go ahead, Paul.
You're right, Taylor.
Paul, are you there?
I'll speak. I'll try and speak quickly because I know what the lag is like, and I'll try and speak un-Glaswegian slowly and coherently. But I've got a couple of bones to pick with you, by the way, Taylor. A couple of bones. First of all, I don't know why you're sitting there defending the British Army, who have been the most prolific murder squad in human history. And as James O'Brien would say, that's not an opinion, that's just numbers. And also, the next point of contention I've got to, where is the Workers' Party in Glasgow, by the way? Absolutely nowhere to be seen. On yourself.
Well, thanks for that, Paul. You were mercifully brief. I'll clip what you said about me sitting here defending the British Army. I may need it at my trial for being the leader of the civil disobedience campaign to wreck the government's attempt to conscript our young people in the army. As to your second question, I genuinely have no idea what you're talking about. Let me go to Canada. I'll get more sense. Gary is there and wants to talk about the ICC. Go ahead, Gary.
Oh, hi. Yes, I have a question, which is, well, first of all, best of luck. I don't think you need it in your election. But yeah, I hope for you and your party all the best, because there's such a sham going on internationally. Like the people who are ruling us are not worth anything, apart from criminal sentences, perhaps. But yeah, that's a digression. Yes. But so yeah, Israel is refusing, obviously, to halt their genocidal campaign, and the ICJ, any international order means nothing to these people. So the next thing which will happen, I'm sure, is that the Security Council, one or more concerned members, will be bringing a motion to consider having an order of Security Council put an end to this slaughter. And of course, we know that the U.S. will veto any such a resolution. And then after that, which has been the story all throughout this terrible tragedy, I understand that it's possible for the General Assembly to put forward a motion, which will be the only recourse, to be able to expel an unfit member, which Israel most certainly is. And I would hope that that resolution would be carried by whatever majority. I don't know if it's 2/3 or what it takes to be able to get such a thing. But okay, yeah, that would be like, what else could we do? And there's never been a more deserving country to be cast out. So, like, how dare they?
Absolutely right, Gary. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, I suppose, I was going to ask is how you would feel about that, but I do have one more level to take this to, which would be, do you think that the U.S. Should suffer a similar expulsion because of their just horrific illegal behavior and the way that they have destroyed the credibility of the United Nations? I don't think that we need them in this League of Nations anymore.
No, I think that the United Nations is doomed. I know that it has done some good work in some places from time to time, but I think its day is done. Expelling the US, of course, is a non-starter because the UN is in the US. which should never have been agreed in the first place. If anywhere could be said to be neutral, it wouldn't be New York City, and yet that is where the United Nations is. And even heads of state have to get visas into the United States to go and address and vote in the United Nations. This is clearly absurd and was manageable for a time when American administrations were at least within certain parameters of their contempt for international opinion, but they long ago now swept those parameters away and act as the international war criminal that the United States has become, with the British running around like the rat after the elephant, feeding on the droppings of the bigger beast. So it is high time for a new United Nations to be formed in a neutral place, with those who are prepared to not just observe and respect, but implement international law. So, for example, the ICJ decision that Israel must stop Rafah is powerless unless the Security Council passes a resolution to give it effect, to send force, to make sure that the ICJ ruling is implemented. And as you rightly said, the United States and the United Kingdom would veto that. So in a sense, their eminences in their robes in Brussels of the ICJ are just puffing hot air out of their mouths, if not out of their ass. Because if nobody's going to implement the rulings and instructions that they are making, then why are we paying for a farce like that, to provide a kind of veneer, a kind of lipstick on the pig of international lawlessness? Expelling Israel from the United Nations should have been done decades ago. Israel is the only country in the world that came into existence as a result of a decision of the United Nations. Yet no country in the world has more often and for longer completely defied the decisions of the United Nations, even those that were not vetoed, that are the consensus of the Security Council, like Resolution 242, 338, which demanded Israel withdraw from the territories it occupied illegally in the war in 1967, which are, of course, the Golan Heights, the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and the Gaza Strip. That resolution was passed in 1967, and nothing has been done about the presence in the United Nations of a country which for more than 50 years has defied two Security Council resolutions unanimously passed that they must vacate the occupied territories. It is truly extraordinary. Thank you very much for that. David Greenwood said, didn't the Haganah paramilitary murder and torture British and Australian soldiers in Palestine when their comrades were fighting German Nazis and Italian fascists in North Africa and Vichy French troops in Syria? Well, the Haganah, the Stern gang, the Ergun gang, were not just murdering British soldiers, but British police officers, British civil servants, most spectacularly in the King David Hotel in Jerusalem, which they blew up in a terrorist outrage, killing 93 British officials. 93 in one terrorist act. Nobody's taught that, you know, in Britain. There is not a school child in all of the United Kingdom who will ever be told that salient fact, who will ever be told that the reason why the late Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II never visited Israel, though she visited practically every other country in the world. She never visited Israel because the blood of her soldiers, police officers, and civil servants was in the ground in occupied Jerusalem. Alison Barber says, why has Mandelson never been investigated? I wake up every day asking that question. Sylvia Mason says, George for Prime Minister, Lowkey for his second in command, please. Isn't he wonderful, Lowkey? Truly world class. I'll be right back after this short break with Richard Medhurst, another renowned independent journalist and political analyst. Stay tuned.
Mr. President, we got a report of a 50-foot woman marauding through Washington, sir.
Thank you, Captain. But I'm looking for a shorter woman, one who likes to take long strolls in the park and yell at minorities.
She's not looking for a date. She's terrorizing the city.
Is there a difference? A little levity. Call in the military.
We are the military, sir.
Boy, we got here fast. We better do something, right?
Shall I scramble the jets, Mr. President?
No, thanks. I'll just take a muffin and some coffee.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Will Israel defy the ICJ ruling on Rafah? Answers yes or no on my Telegram channel, t.me/George Galloway, on my Twitter, or on the YouTube community poll, or on the YouTube stream. 37,111 of you have voted. Let's get that to 40,000. Here are the numbers. In the US and Canada, toll free, +1 844 944 3344. Free in the United Kingdom and Ireland, 0808 196 5522, and the international number 44203 966 2625. And a big welcome again to those listening to the show on KPFK. That's 90.7 FM across Los Angeles and Southern California. Richard Medhurst was in Iran last week when something dramatic happened. Let's hear a report from him without having to climb through the thorn bushes of hate and prejudice against Iran in the mainstream media. Richard, it was one hell of a time to be in Iran. The president, the foreign minister, killed in a still unexplained helicopter crash, and then the biggest funerals I have ever seen. Tell us your impressions.
Well, thanks for having me on, George. It's great to speak with you again. And you're absolutely right. I wasn't expecting. I mean, in my wildest dreams to be, to receive the news that the president and the foreign minister had both died. I mean, I thought someone was playing a joke. Or pulling my leg when I heard this. I really thought that they're joking because I'm in the country and I didn't hear any of this. So this is when they were still searching for him, and I was up all night watching the news, flicking between the channels in English and Arabic, trying to understand Farsi, and they were trying to find him for hours and hours. And the reason is because when you have a high value person or a VIP like the president, you don't turn on the transponders because then everybody can see where you are. So it's a security risk. And that's why, in addition to the rough terrain, they took so long to find them. And very, very, very sad. I mean, it's a loss for everybody. It's not just a loss for the Iranians. It's a loss for the whole world. And when the day of the funeral, we got up at like 6 a.m. because can you imagine, like the funeral starts at 8 or 9 and we got up at 6 because we knew it's going to be so crowded. And we were in the car, and then we couldn't. The road was blocked because there were so many cars. We had to get out and walk on foot. I'm just trying to give you an idea of how packed it was. And in the end, we didn't even go to the main street. We were on a side street, still at the University of Tehran, where this was happening. And nevertheless, it was I mean, jam packed. You know, we were stuck in there like sardines. You couldn't leave even if you wanted to. And that wasn't even the main streets. So the ones that were parallel and perpendicular to us were even fuller. And I filmed a lot of videos during the prayers, you know, before, when people were milling in. I've never seen anything like this, you know, and I find it bizarre that in England we see nothing wrong, of course, with, you know, state funeral for the Queen or you know, Diana. But when the Iranians have one, we start making fun of them. We start, you know, negating or trying to dispute the figures. I mean, what is this? Who has time for this nonsense? I was there, and I'm telling you, there were millions of people. Okay, you had so many foreign dignitaries who also came to pay their respects. Putin was supposed to come initially, and then he sent the Speaker of the Duma. You had the Vice Chinese Prime Minister, the Azerbaijani, the Armenian prime ministers. You know, you had the Pakistani prime minister as well. These people, you don't see that often. You only see this when someone of value, someone who has done a lot for the world and not just their country, passes away. And you know, right now we don't know what it was. So we're still waiting for the investigation. But yeah, it was a once in a lifetime experience, and unfortunately, you know, a very sad and morose one.
Well, the British coverage said that there were thousands of people at the funeral, although in fact there were at least 5 funerals in different cities.
Yeah.
Because exactly. There were 5 people, I think, died, and also the president's body was, as it were, taken on a cortege through his own hometown, and then also for burial in Tehran itself. Yet they said thousands, though any fool could see by looking at the pictures that it was millions. A problem they solved by not showing you the pictures. And they also claimed that the Iranians were happy to see the back of President Raisi. Do you find any evidence for that?
No. First of all, yes, there were thousands, but there were also hundreds of thousands in addition in total. It wasn't just thousands of people. That's a complete lie. And I find it funny because the BBC wanted to interview me on that day because of you know, what the footage that I posted, and then we were setting up a time, and then they suddenly disappeared, which is very telling because, you know, they can't have much truth on the channel, God forbid. So no, this thing about thousands is not true, and also this idea that there were Iranians who were forced to come. I mean, if that's true, the Iranians have the most sophisticated state apparatus in history, but no one was forced to come. They were not forced to come. I mean, I could see that. And in addition, this idea that they were celebrating. I mean, look, I'm sure there were some people celebrating. I don't know how many they were, but I didn't see any, and they certainly weren't in public. So, you know, whenever any president or any politician dies, some people are happy or you know, especially people who are in the opposition and the Iranian diaspora who are exiled. But I didn't see anything like that. On the contrary, you know, you had people weeping, men and women alike, just sad. And they came out in the scorching sun and stood there for hours and prayed. And, you know, it was very, very beautiful, but also, of course, sad at the same time. You know, it's funny because we always manage to predict the turnout of funerals in advance, and the same thing with elections, right? So we always know in advance in the West that the Syrian elections are fraudulent, and the same thing in Venezuela. And we know that no one is going to come to the funeral of Raisi. It's amazing, right? I'd love to see the crystal balls that they have at the BBC.
Now, what next for Iran? How stable did you find the regime to be? What kind of changes have there been in Iran and might now happen? I mean, who, for example, will be the next president? Have you got any inside track on that?
Well, you know, I'll just start by saying this because we see another Western talking point fall apart, because we always say, or we always hear in the media, that Iran is a dictatorship, but it's not true. They're having elections in 50 days, less than 50 days. They have their own democratic institutions, but we choose to ignore that, of course. So again, they're going to have elections in less than 50 days. At the moment, I can't say who's a favorite or who isn't a favorite, because they haven't even signed up yet for the election. So I certainly tried asking around and gauging and trying to figure out who is a favorite. But I can tell you, for the foreign minister at least, Dr. Ali Bagheri, he was the deputy foreign minister, and now he's succeeded to the post of acting foreign minister. And I interviewed him in Vienna during the nuclear talks, and he's a very skilled diplomat. And usually you'll have the foreign minister himself who will go and negotiate things like the nuclear deal, but they sent him, even though he was the deputy, which I think is a testament to how skilled he is in international relations. And so what's next for Iran? Well, I'll say this. I think that Iran is going to be even stronger, because every time we've had a loss like this, whether, for example, it's an assassination, and again, I don't know if Raisi was assassinated or not, but the point is that when a great political figure is lost in Hamas or Hezbollah or Iran, the resistance gets stronger. Their resolve is strengthened, and they're even more driven. And everybody in Iran said the same thing. I spoke to a lot of people. I tried to gauge what happened, and I also took into consideration, the past, of course. So they're going to continue supporting the resistance axis. They're going to continue supporting the Palestinians without question. That's something that they've done consistently since 1979. So it's not about to change now. It's just again, it's a terrible loss, because Raisi, he's somebody who took Iran into BRICS. He also worked heavily with Shanghai Cooperation Organization. He went and signed a railway deal with Iraq. Same thing with the Russians. He just a few weeks ago signed a $1 billion deal with the Pakistanis. He signed a 25-year economic partnership with China. So, he laid the groundwork for future generations to benefit from this multipolar world that we're transitioning into. And, it takes a very skilled pair to do that. If you're foreign minister, also you're juggling between the United Nations, the IAEA, then of course all these other bilateral and multilateral organizations. It is a very difficult job to be the Iranian president or the Iranian foreign minister, and they handle it with finesse and elegance. And it's a loss for everybody, frankly. It really is. But I've no doubt that they will stay the course, and they will continue in the same way that they always have.
Now, you mentioned the resistance, the Palestinian resistance. I mean, if you're going to measure Netanyahu's success with how he has freed Israeli hostages and defeated the Palestinian resistance factions, you'd have to objectively adjudge it a complete failure, wouldn't you? Because virtually not one single hostage has been freed, and the resistance are this evening landing rockets on Tel Aviv. So undefeated are they? What's your feeling about the rising tide of opposition to Netanyahu in Israel? It's not an opposition, of course, that wants justice for Palestine, but it sure is united in its belief that Netanyahu has failed. Is that how you see it?
Well, I don't like to think in an imperialist manner, but, divide and conquer it certainly seems to be at play here. And that's obviously to the advantage of everybody who is against genocide, because if the Israelis are busy arguing with one another, well, that's good for the rest of the planet, because, we don't need the Israelis and their politics. Even a so-called liberal Zionist or a left Zionist is still a Zionist and is still living on stolen land. And you hinted at that. So I think we're on the same wavelength in regards to that. But with Netanyahu, I mean, he's trying to keep this war going as long as possible, because he wants to save face first and foremost. He wants to keep his job. As long as the war is still ongoing and being prosecuted, you can't get rid of him. He has this this wartime cabinet, and everybody who's displeased has to shut up and do what they're told in the end. So he has a grip on power right now that is to his advantage, but he's losing the war. And, you know, when we talk about the Gaza war, we have to remember that we're talking about several fronts. It's not just in Gaza, it's in the West Bank, it's in Syria, it's in Iraq, it's in Yemen, and in Lebanon, and even Iran. We had Iran firing 300 missiles at the Israelis just last month. So we can't disregard that as something that isn't a front. It absolutely is. And when you are fighting on two fronts, you're in trouble, never mind seven. This is basic, military strategy. So the Israelis are in big trouble, and as are the Americans alongside them. And so, you know, right now they're firing at Tel Aviv. That shows you how much the Israelis have failed. So after 8 months, they've failed to cripple Hamas's infrastructure. They have failed to capture any Hamas leaders. They have failed to destroy Hamas as an organization. They have failed to free any hostages. As a matter of fact, they've killed more hostages than they could hope to free at this point. So they're in minus, basically. It's scandalous. It's really scandalous. And I think if we look at this behavior, how they bomb everyone, including their own people, we understand why there was a massacre on October 7th. There was indeed a massacre, but the massacre was carried out by Israelis, by their helicopters, because they fire indiscriminately, because they are terrorists. And George, before I came on, I heard you talking about the Stern Gang and the Irgun and all these terrorist groups that went on to become the IDF. You know, they haven't changed. They have not changed since 100 years ago. They are still the same terrorists that murdered British soldiers and British civil servants and politicians and put bombs around London. They invented modern terrorism. And the thing is that when you're a terrorist, you have no guarantee that you're going to be good at military strategy. And that's what we're seeing right now. The Israelis claim to have liberated or cleared out areas in the north of Gaza, and then suddenly Hamas are popping up behind them when they've gone south. So we see something similar to the 2006 war in Lebanon, where Hezbollah would just pop out of the ground and take the Israelis. But now this is even more intense because it's been going on for so long. And them firing rockets at Tel Aviv, it just shows you that Hamas have full operational capability. They have been crippled in no manner whatsoever. And they have access to all sorts of ordnances and weaponry. They've got mortars, rocket-propelled grenades. They have IEDs that they're building with duds dropped by the Israelis. They've got machine gun rounds. They've got everything they need to prosecute this war. Whereas the Israelis collapse like a house of cards if the Americans don't give them weapons every 24 hours. So, I guarantee you, 20 years, 30 years, 50 years from now, military colleges and universities will be teaching the guerrilla tactics that were employed by Hamas in this war. Guaranteed.
Richard Medhurst, as always, a pleasure to talk to you and an education too. That's Richard Medhurst, renowned independent journalist and political analyst. The poll is going very, very big. 38,253 people have now voted. We've got about half an hour left. What's your answer to the question? Will Israel defy the ICJ ruling on Rafah? Yes or no on Telegram. It's currently running at 96% yes, Israel will defy it. On Twitter, 93%. On the YouTube community poll, 96%. On the YouTube stream, 94%. So the result is clear. But let's get the quantum over that 40,000. That's a pretty big opinion poll, I must say. So let me take a quick break. Then it's Anna in Miami and Alan in Liverpool. It's a global university, this one. Stay tuned.
I must start by congratulating you. It's great to be talking to George Galloway, MP, again.
Congratulations on your resounding victory. I think that I could speak on behalf of the world when I say we are thrilled to have you back in office.
Hi Bella, congratulations to your win. I would like to say that you were voted by the people, all the people that wanted you there. The other person, Starmer, Rishi Sunak, they weren't elected by the people. And I think you should broaden the horizon. I think I want to work for you in Birmingham and actually help your voice coming out of what's happening in Palestine.
Congratulations on such a huge victory. As I said on Twitter, it's a rare glint of hope in the midst of Gaza's dark night.
And I want to congratulate you on your momentous victory in Rochdale. You really put the fear of God into the political elite in this country, and that is something we can all be thankful for.
I want to congratulate you on your win. I think it's not just a win for you, George, but I think it's a win for Palestine in so many ways.
Thank you for everything that you're doing in the UK, because as a young communist in America, it's very inspiring to see your victory and everything that the Workers' Party of Great Britain is doing. I'm just so happy, and I will fully endorse George Galloway for Prime Minister and get rid of the Zionist in office who's currently occupying it.
You've been saying this for the longest time, and nobody seems to listen to you. I mean, those who don't seem to get what you've been standing for, when you said, yeah, this is about Palestine and the UK. Free Palestine means a free UK. They don't listen.
And Rochdale's are very lucky. I wish you have a candidate in Coventry.
Thank you very much.
You know, you've given a lot of people a lot of hope and a big boost and an understanding that it is possible to beat the system, that no matter how powerful the political class may be, no matter how much they've got the mainstream media in particular under their thumb, the broadcast media, no matter how much they seek to control the narrative, given a chance, the people will reject them.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Let's go straight to the great city of Liverpool, where Alan wants to talk about China. Let's hear what Alan has to say. Go ahead, Alan.
Hello, George. Yes, we had that recent visit of a pathetic American delegation who went to Peking, or Beijing, I should say, and of course they were sent away, with a barely hidden dismissal. It's because it was a standard.
Alan? Oh my goodness. Hope his phone didn't run out. Let's get back to him. Anne Robertson says, National Service send the politicians to do their own clean-up of their own decisions. Grrr, I will not be happy. No parent will be happy, Anne. I have 5 children under 18, and I can tell you right now, none of them will be going to Rishi Sunak's conscript army. Road Gent says 42 days notice for a general election is way too short. It is unprecedented. It is disappointing. Well, I'm very happy that we are now right into the general election, but it is undoubtedly true that we're only in it because Rishi Sunak would otherwise have been overthrown. I can tell you that as a fact. There was a steady stream of no confidence motions coming in against Rishi Sunak from his own members of parliament. And in the day before the election was called, the chairman of the 1922 committee, to whom such motions, letters of no confidence had to be sent, announced that he would now accept them by text. That was the last straw. That meant that in a text storm, Rishi would have been out at the hands of his own members. The very fate, of course, that he delivered against his predecessors. So rather than fall as a result of an internal coup in the palace, he decided to destroy the Conservative Party in a general election. And everything he's doing and saying, and the maladroit way in which he's saying and doing it is making sure that the Conservatives are going to suffer the mother of all defeats. And I'm happy about that. But the opposition leader is even worse than Rishi Sunak. And that's why we have to break with the two-party system. Nicola Curtin says, does the Workers' Party support limiting the number of terms a prime minister and a political party can serve in government. I don't think the Workers' Party has a point of view on that. My own point of view would be, no, I don't support it. That the people should have the Prime Minister and the political party that they vote for in power for as long as they want them. But the electoral system in Britain is what needs to change. We have a situation where if Keir Starmer gets 40% of the vote, he'll get 80% of the seats. That cannot possibly be right. If our party gets 500,000 votes, or even 1 million votes, it has no guarantee of even a single seat in Parliament. On the other hand, if we get one Member of Parliament and 150,000 votes, we get promoted to the Parliamentary Premier League. We begin to get state funding on a pound per vote basis, and we get privileges in the House of Commons, like being called to ask the Prime Minister a question every Wednesday, not just when you get lucky. We get the privilege of being able to initiate debates and urgent questions and all kinds of other things. So people sometimes ask me, why are we standing hundreds of candidates? Well, there are 3 reasons, Nicola. One is to give the people a chance to make me the Prime Minister of Britain. It sounds silly, but if every one of our candidates was elected, I would be the Prime Minister. And that would mean a very different Britain, to be sure. The second reason is to ensure that we get televised party political broadcasts on behalf of the Workers' Party. The third reason is so that we can force our way onto the national opinion polls. Because, of course, if the respondent in these opinion polls is not asked if they would support the Workers' Party, they cannot declare that they would. And we need to force our way into these polls, force our way into the leaders' debates, force our way into the political discourse in the so-called mainstream media. But we are not waiting for any of those things. We've got our own media. We are using it, and we are asking everybody to help us spread the message on their social media too. Now we've reconnected to Alan in Liverpool. Sounded like a wise man. Let's hear from him again. Alan, what would you like to say?
Right, well, I'll be very quick, George. I know you've pressed for time, and perhaps I'm pressed on this channel. I hope you heard the first bit. I was basically sort of saying the American...
I did.
It's fine. Okay, the real irony is that in a much more modest way, Tony Benn's economic program involving a state investment bank, helping technical innovation, etc., like firms like MOATS, Transputer, they were actually early successful examples, are a really mild version of what the Chinese are doing. They own 80% of the banks. They don't allow financial domination of the political process. They control a lot of the scientific research. They direct funds to private and public sector companies, and they make them work together in a united approach. It's far more successful. The Anglo-American models, particularly the Anglo bit, because we haven't got the resources of the United States and other advantages. We unfortunately have this consensus, really a Thatcherite consensus, which needs to be broken. Long time ago, I was a member of the Tessa Jarwell's Labour constituency in London. I'm sure you've met her and you know her. And she said to me, Alan, you've got to understand, the Tories have won the economic argument. And I said to her, Tessa, I assure you, anybody with grey matter between the two ears, and anybody cognizant of the facts about British economic performance and comparative performance with other countries in Europe cannot say that. It's going to be a looming disaster. And she stayed with this viewpoint ever since, and it's still there, that the Tories basically have established the ground. Well, I want to know why is it we have the lowest growth rate over 10 years, despite the fact that we had North Sea oil and gas coming on. I think it's unfortunate that the Labour Party won the 74 election myself. If they'd won it in 79, when the oil revenues had started coming in, history would be completely different, and Mrs. Thatcher would be an obscure figure long since forgotten. But to pretend that the initial Tory legacy, the first 11-year legacy, was successful is the cause of the problem. The Labour Party have internalised that now, and you just can't challenge the orthodoxy. You know, that's basically what I found up. It's real irony that Tony Blair...
Well, it's a very powerful point. Labour's programme for Britain, written by Mr. Tony Benn for the 1974 election. I can see it in front of my eyes right now. And because I knew Mr. Benn well for many decades, I spoke about it many times, and you are absolutely correct. Mr. Benn's programme for Britain was a milder, more moderate, less ambitious version of the Chinese economic policy. And anyone who's ever been to China in recent times, or even just has the courage to look China up on YouTube, on the internet, on these travelogue programs and so on. China is a rip-roaring economic success. It has political problems, and they're for another day, but the economics of China cannot possibly be gainsaid. It is a rip-roaring economic success story. Good, interesting point about Labour winning the election in 74. I was pleased that they did at the time, but you may well have a point that it would have been better to lose it and win in 79. Ronan is in Belfast on the King David Hotel issue in Jerusalem. Go ahead, Ronan.
Well, first of all, George, I would like to say congratulations on your re-election to Parliament. I truly believe that voices like yours really, really are needed at this moment in time. We are at an inflection point in history, and I think anybody that's got, as Alan just said, a grey matter between ears can see that. The point that I wanted to make here was my grandfather. He was part of a long-range desert group. He served in North Africa. He was captured in Tobruk. My great-uncle, he fought in the RAF, part of the Battle of Britain. All Catholics from Northern Ireland, you know. Which, you know, if you know the history at the time, it's like, oh, Christ, what were those people doing fighting for the British? It's like, well, look, some fights need to be fought, do you know? And I always remember a thing that my grandfather said to me. It was the year before he died in 1996. I was 15. And he made the point, he never really spoke about the war. He didn't speak about his time as a POW. He didn't speak about what it was that they were doing in North Africa or any of that kind of thing. But, and the point in relation to what you were making, he was on the ground in Israel, Palestine at the time. He was at the King David Hotel. He was sifting through the rubble whenever the Israelis, Stern Gang, you know, I don't even want to sort of say it was the extremists in Israel, because that wasn't how my grandfather saw it. The way he always saw it was is that, look, they didn't want anybody seeing what they were doing. Anybody. You know, they killed everybody. Ambushes, you know, the King David Hotel is the most obvious example of it. And the thing that gets me about where we're currently sitting is my grandfather, my great-uncle, and many other of your listeners whose, you know, ancestors fought in the war, they fought that war on the ground. Nobody else have to fight a stupid rich man bankers war ever again. You know, again, some things need to be fought. And I look at, whenever I see...
Well, that's very beautifully
Sunak,
expressed, Ronan. Very beautifully expressed. And glory to your grandfather and all of those who fought in the LRDG, amongst the bravest, most adventurous of all British forces, working behind the lines, behind the Axis lines in North Africa. My own grandfather, Thomas O'Reilly, God rest his soul, an Irish, Catholic, Republican, communist, also fought in the British Army under Montgomery, and indeed was one of the first in the queue to volunteer to join the British Army. And people asked him the same question that you rhetorically asked. What would someone like you be fighting for the British for? And his answer was clear, that the biggest enemy was fascism, and we had to unite all those who were prepared to defeat fascism. And he fought also in North Africa, in the 8th Army under Montgomery, and fought all the way from El Alamein to Monte Cassino. And like your grandfather, didn't like to talk much about the war, but never had a peaceful night's sleep without bad dreams of Monte Cassino in particular. They were not the extremists. They were the mainstream of the Zionist movement. They deliberately created these fronts like the Irgun, Zvi Leumi, and the Stern gang. And the leaders of both of these two terrorist groups both of them became prime ministers of Israel. So they were not, outliers in any way. And the bombing of the King David Hotel was an operation of all of the armed forces of the Zionist terror operation. You don't have to take my word for it. Just look up the newspapers of the time. All of them used the word. Jewish terrorists have blown up here, hanged there, shot and murdered, executed, assassinated here, there, and everywhere. They even tried to murder Churchill while he was fighting Hitler. They invented modern terrorism, as you said, Ronan, and well done to you for doing so. Next up is a legend. It's our own resident professor in the Sunshine State of Florida. It is Simon. Up next. Go ahead, Simon.
Greetings to you, Mr. Galloway, and to your worldwide audience. Well, obviously, being focused on the British general election now, but there are a few tricks that these folks like to play, and one of them obviously is a grand distraction. And it would appear to me that this is exactly what this proposal for the reinstatement of national service. Obviously, it's an idea that was put forth by David Cameron in 2014. And ironically, the idea was rejected just 1 week ago by the Deputy Defence Minister from the Conservative Party. So one then has to say, well, if they're possibly trying to take our view away from something else, what is it that they're particularly concerned about us not seeing? And one of those things might be that neither party, neither Labour nor the Conservative and Unionist Party, were prepared for Roland to call this election at this point. And they have many, many candidate vacancies in their constituencies. And now we see both Labour in North Islington and the Conservative Party, that will likely do it 100-fold, dropping candidates into seats. So we have very much a concentration of power and possibly a total transformation of both parliamentary powers and their members in Parliament, because of the short notice that they've basically been able to cast all of their, what in America they would call the primary procedures, whereby the candidates for each party were actually selected according to their own party rules. Given that it is essentially now a snap election with less than 6 weeks to go, all manner of people who may be selected because of their Zionist inclinations or some other overriding interest, which, unlike the Workers' Party of Great Britain, doesn't really tie in with the needs and wishes of the average person, but But when this announcement was made, the first thing that sprung to my mind, and some of your audience might think it's strange, but I'm sure you'll appreciate it, was the 1958, the first of the great series of 31 movies, Carry On Sergeant, with Bob Monkhouse and Hattie Jakes.
Yeah.
And you will, of course, remember that was 1958, towards the tail end of British National Service, possibly to be outdone by the wonderful series from 1974 to 1981, It Ain't Half Hot, Mum, which showed similar folks in the border between India and Burma at the tail end of World War II. People can go and find those on YouTube. But I think that the thing that triggered it most was the rock and roller, as indeed you are in parliamentary terms, who in the Carry On Sergeant movie was against his wishes conscripted to serve Her Majesty's Armed Forces. And he, of course, was called Andy Galloway.
Wow. I'd forgotten that if I ever knew it, Simon. That is stunning. I'm one of those that will be going to look for that on YouTube. My late uncle was, in fact, by the name of Andy Galloway. God bless you, Simon. You might well be right. This may all be a rabbit, a hare set running to take our mind off something else. Anna is in Miami. Let's hear from her. Go ahead, 2 Florida calls in a row. Go ahead, Anna.
Hello, Mr. Galloway. Hey, I need
Welcome. Go ahead.
I need to let you know how famously popular your Great Britain Workers' Party is in America.
Wow.
It's absolutely just gangbusters here. I reposted your MOATS poll, and I got some interesting comments. I got the exact same results as you did, but I got super interesting comments, and they were mostly regarding Spain, Norway, and Ireland, you know, in support of what they're doing, and also in support of the Workers' Party and George Galloway.
Wow.
It was beautiful.
Well, Anna, unfortunately, they can't vote for me, but their good wishes, and if they are believers, their prayers will be most welcome. We are fighting many, many fights. I'm fighting one of the toughest of them, myself, in my own constituency. We need the goodwill of all people, and the best wishes you have conveyed have been tremendous. Anna, last comment from you?
Sir, I just wanted to add this. I believe that what happened on October 7th is being downplayed regarding the Hannibal Directive. I believe that the operation, which is Operation Jericho Wall, was planned, and I believe that it was made to go live due to the failures in Ukraine. To be quite honest with you, I believe it was a false flag. I believe the United States CIA and Mossad called it, and that's my stance, and I'm sticking to it.
Well, look, I can understand why people have no confidence at all, no trust at all in the state, in the states that are allied with our states, and so on. I don't myself agree with you. I believe that the October 7th operation was an authentic one. I believe that the Israelis certainly had reason to know about it, that Netanyahu had the opportunity to strengthen his defense against it, but did not take it. But most of these things are unknowable. What is knowable is known, and as you rightly put it, is being covered up, is the sheer number of the casualties on October 7th that were inflicted, in fact, by Israeli reckless use of force, Monte Cassino type force. The Hannibal Directive was deployed, was employed. People who looked like they were being taken hostage were deliberately killed along with their kidnappers. They were, as part of the Hannibal Directive invented by or designed by Netanyahu, they were deliberately slaughtered. The mayhem in the car park at the music festival was quite obviously, to anyone with eyes, inflicted by helicopter gunships. It was inflicted from the air. No one on the ground could have committed the carnage that took place in that car park because, well, the trajectory of the bullets through the roofs is very clear and the ordnance used is very obvious. And guess what? They buried all those cars along with the people. They buried the cars precisely because any investigation, even a cursory one, of those cars would have revealed that they were a part of the Hannibal Directive. They were destroyed by Israeli armed force and not the armed force of the Palestinian resistance factions. That said, the Palestinian resistance factions killed a lot of people on October 7th. We don't know what proportion of those who died. We don't even know an accurate number of those who died because Israel was counting the Palestinian dead in the total dead and giving a figure of 1,400. That number has been revised downwards. The supposed deaths of the Palestinian fighters has been taken out of that number, and the number is down to the 900 or so mark. That's a lot of dead people. 900 is a lot of dead people. It's nothing like as big a number as the subsequent days from October 8th onward, but it's still a very significant number of people. I have no doubt that that some illegitimate use of force was used. Palestinian people have a right to resist their illegal occupier, but laws of war and moral war at that, especially for religious people, have to be observed. So insofar as innocent people were killed, insofar as children were killed, women were killed, elderly people were killed, that's illegitimate. That is unlawful killing. But the right of the Palestinians to fight the armed forces and the forces of their illegal occupier is actually enshrined in international law. Israel has no right of self-defense against threats emanating from the people they illegally occupy. That is actually the international law, though you'll never hear Piers Morgan utter that. And a wonderful call and great news for us of the goodwill of the people in your state. Now, how lucky am I? I'm in the same room as my good wife, Gayatri. What's rattling, Gayatri?
So, conscription. Conscription is back on the table.
And we have children who will be conscripted.
I raised the matter with them and they all disagreed, so there you have it. Linda Southampton says, "Hi George, Rishi just lost the election declaring conscription. Now let's hope Daddy Pig puts his dirty trotter in it too." And Rod says, "The lunatics have created the situation in Ukraine and in Israel, and now they want cannon fodders. I too say no to war. Mr. Sunak will soon be out of work, so let's put a rifle over his shoulder so he can lead by example. I believe this has been the plan as far back as the lockdown pre-2020 in order to program people into following a regime of their idea of principle.
Well, so it's only a couple of weeks ago, not even that a government minister said we need to encourage everyone to hoard mineral water and food for dangerous times. I did make the point at the time that many of my constituents have neither the money to buy a big stock of food for dangerous times, nor the space in cold, damp, and small, overcrowded houses to actually put the stuff, the water, the food, and so on in. But there's been one effort after another to sensitize us, to normalize the possibility that we might actually be at war.
Well, I looked at the comments of Rishi's announcement of this national service. I have seen no positive ones.
No.
From left, right, and centre.
No,
so
I mean, some people think he's deliberately thrown the election on this.
Yeah.
In which case, that would be a very interesting seam to mine. Are Sunak and Starmer actually conspiring together to make the Tory party lose big and Starmer's victory to be so big that he gets a full 10-year term?
Yeah, I read plenty of those as well. Now, the national service obviously poses the idea of fighting against Britain's enemies, including Russia. So this one is from Walter Cairns, who says, what so many people don't seem to realize is that the Russians are keen chess players and think several moves ahead of their opposition. I am sure that Russian High Command had already factored in the possibility of full-scale NATO involvement in the special military operation in Ukraine. In addition, they review the situation on a daily basis. Every decision taken goes through layers and layers of expertise, consultation, and decision-making in this campaign. This is only to highlight the sheer unviability of the West's support for the fascist Ukrainian efforts.
You know, I really wonder at the sanity of it all. It is not in the interests of even the oligarchs in Western countries. Never mind the people. Quite clearly, it's not in the interests of the people to have a war with Russia. But it isn't even in the interests of the capitalists, the oligarchs, the bankers, the powerful and the rich. It's not in their interest because any war with Russia will inevitably escalate into the kind of nuclear conflagration that I spoke about in my monologue. I mean, if you can't see that, you're absolutely blind.
Yes, absolutely blind, absolutely blind. Goran says, how come nobody of you serious political analysts want to connect the two wars occurring currently, namely one in Ukraine and one in Palestine? Please, George, can you explain to the public the underlying cause defining that connection?
Well, I have many times. It's the same parties involved. The Western Empire, by which I mean the American Empire, and its European and Canadian, Australian satrapies. It's both wars are their wars. Israel is one of the satrapies of the American Empire, just like Canada and Britain are. And therefore, it's the same us against them.
Yeah.
It's they hate the Palestinians and support the Israelis because Israel is a part of us. And the other is something else, something darker. And that's true also of the Russians, except the hatred of Russia in Britain is particularly deep and goes back for a particularly long time, more than 150 years, closer to 200 years. Russia was seen as, you and I listened to a podcast about it, The Great Game, about how Afghanistan was agreed to be a buffer between the emerging Great Russia and the Great British Empire. They saw Russia as a rival for hundreds of years. And then when Russia became a socialist country, well, that was a double threat.
Yeah.
And since Russia ceased to be a socialist country, the hatred has, if anything, intensified.
Yeah, and this is the weird point, isn't it? Obviously, during the Cold War, there is an ideological opposition, but now that they are a fellow capitalist, white Christian country, what is the hatred based on?
That's a very, very good question and very well expressed. Have you got one more for me?
Yeah, let's go. So I have got a response to your poll. Will Israel defy the ICJ ruling on Rafah? Robin Hansman says, at the time of their invasion and eventual occupation of France in the Second World War, did Germany consider the French resistance as terrorists or as freedom fighters? Imagine if an equivalent of the ICJ existed back in the 40s and it made a similar ruling regarding Germany. Would Germany have defied it?
Well, that's a multiply intriguing question. But lying beneath it is the cliche, and it's a cliche because it is the case that one man's freedom fighter is another man's terrorist. The Israelis regard the people that blew up the King David Hotel, killing all these British civil servants and police officers, as freedom fighters. We regard them as terrorists, although British history now and the teenage scribblers who write in the British newspapers now either have never heard of the King David Hotel, or if they have heard of it, they know not to highlight it.
No, exactly that they have to cover it. I just want to remind people on Have It Out with Galloway, that this week we will have your friend Abdel Bari Atwan on.
Abdel Bari
renowned
Atwan,
journalist.
the great man indeed, great man of Arabic letters, who comes from a refugee camp in Gaza. But who's been my friend here in Britain for more than 40 years. So he's my guest on Have It Out with Galloway, but we need more audience participation, don't we?
We do, so please join us. You can be viewed on the wall. You can follow the whole interview with Abdel Bari Atwan and the consequence questions.
Put your tuppence worth in.
Yeah, it's fun actually.
Okay, see you after the show very soon indeed, because we've overrun our time. And remember, now that we are on KPFK 90.7 FM across Los Angeles and Southern California, we have to be a bit more careful about hitting our time marks. But the last call of the evening is Joseph in Shropshire in England. Yes, Joseph, what would you like to say?
Good evening, George. It's Joseph Clayton in Shropshire, England. And what I'd like to say is we need to make the most of your success in Rochdale. And how we can do that is because I'm a supporter of the Workers' Party of Britain. When I make a phone call to the constituency office, it's nationally the published number, and it goes to answer phone, I can't make the most of making contact of the 500 candidates that are coming up so that I can add my support. And at the moment, I've...
well, it's... yeah, the thing is, we simply don't have the resources to man the telephone calls all the time. And we don't have the resources even to return every telephone call. We have quadrupled in size in less than 100 days, which would bring with it its practical difficulties, even if we had resources. But when you add in the fact that we don't have resources, the only money we have is the money that the members give in their subscription and in their donations. The only money we have is that. We have no big donors. We have no trade union funding, because that all goes to the robbers in the Labour Party. We have, of course, no big business donations. We are dependent on, for these elections, our crowdfunding, which is all out there now on every social media platform. So I'm afraid that disappointments like the one you have experienced are inevitable. They cannot be avoided. But if we get one MP and 150,000 votes, 250,000 votes, 500,000 votes, 1 million votes, and with all these candidates, all of these numbers are achievable, then we get from the state that number of votes in pounds. That would lift us into an entirely different stratosphere. And we would be able to have the kind of bureaucracy, the kind of facilities and services, support services, to people like you that are supporters, even members, that we simply cannot at the moment. We have the same skeleton staff running the party today that we had less than 100 days ago before we became 4 times the size. So bear with us, please, dear Joseph. Have pity on us. We're trying our best. My friends will be listening to your reproach and will no doubt take heed of it. Thank you very much indeed for everyone who's watched, listened, called in, written in, made comments on what has been, I think, a rambunctious episode of the mother of all talk shows. I'll be back with Have It Out with Galloway on Tuesday night and with the Wednesday midweek edition of the mother of all talk shows on Wednesday. God willing, of course. And I hope that you'll join us then. From Gayatri and me, it's good night for now.